Command
Okay.
economy in general destroys a country, not just socialism or communism, just command economy in general. Like in my opinion, right now in Islamic, even though I'm an anti-Islam activist, in Iran, I think the Islamic Republic's economy that has caused Iran more harm than Islam. That's how much I think how destructive this is. I think like the Islamic Republic is both Islamic and also somewhat Marxist in its economic ideology, right? Like they believe in isolationism, they believe in self-reliance, they dictate the supply, they dictate prices. And honestly, if the Islamic Republic was just Islamic and not like somewhat Marxist, even though Islam would be very harmful to Iran, I think this command economy has destroyed Iran more than Islam. That's how destructive I think it is.
Norman, can you explain what a command economy is?
Command economy is when the economy is being micromanaged by the state. Marxism
Right.
is an example of that. If you just not let the private sector do its thing and you're deciding the amount of goods that are being sold, how much the prices should, so instead of letting supply and demand organically dictate where things should be, you come in and you try to micromanage things and decide how things should be. That's command economy. Like like milk should be this price, or we should create this many cars, instead of letting
Okay.
the demand dictate. Yeah, that's command economy.
'Cause I
And
was
it's
thinking we
the
almost have
most,
a blend of that now, but no, that's a lot more extreme, right?
yes, yes, it's the most destructive idea next to fascism. It's the most destructive, actually more than fascism. It's the most, it kills more. This idea kills more than anything. This from hunger and lack of affordability for healthcare, this is the most deadly idea in the world. Go ahead.
How every time that
No.
this implemented on a people, they start with instant poverty or almost instant, it seems, right? And they can't
Yep.
afford food. Yeah, it's wild how like it seems like they're gonna have abundance beforehand, and then it's the opposite.
Yeah, exactly. It felt
And
every time. Yeah.
I just wanted to add, though, I mean, I'm for free market economies myself for similar reasons to yourself. But the other problem, there is a problem with free market economies that is affecting capitalism in the West, and it's making people a bit disillusioned with capitalism. And I think the Americans had went some way towards getting on top of it in the early 20th century, but we seem to have lost the plot with that, which has to do with some limitations that need to be put on large international corporations, the kinds of things that bar entry, things like the anti-monopoly laws, that sort of thing, where you get
Right.
exclusion or collusion that excludes competition. And that in itself is very destructive of capitalism, and that needs to be managed. That's just my
Right.
contribution, because people often overlook that.
No, yeah, that's true because we have four types of capitalism. And so we have laws of fair capitalism, we have regulated capitalism, we have crony capitalism, and we have state capitalism. So the
Mm.
best type of capitalism is regulated capitalism, which partly regulates for breaking up monopolies, right?
Yeah.
So that's the best type of capitalism. So there needs to be some type of regulation. So other than breaking up monopolies, right, there also needs to be regulation regarding positive and negative externalities because the market is blind. I mean, I'm not going to go into an economic lesson, but the state also needs to adjust for positive and negative externalities because the market is blind to that. Carol, I saw you raising your hand. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, the one big flaw with capitalistic societies is that it widens the gap, the haves and have-nots, and that, to an
Yep.
extreme in the United States, I think, but in general.
So does socialism.
Yep.
Hmm.
I mean, okay. So let me ask you a question, Carol. Like, which one do you prefer? I suggest two societies to you. Okay, we have society A, and the poorest people are at level one,
So I wouldn't
and the
want to
rich.
live under socialistic,
No,
socialism.
no,
Yeah,
I
I wouldn't
know,
want to live
I
under
know, I
that.
know. I'm not challenging you, but this is an interesting. I'm not challenging you, right? So let's say, forget socialism and capitalism. Look at these two societies, okay? Society A, the poorest people are at level 1 and the richest people are at level 10, okay? And then society B, the poorest people are at level 5 and the richest people are at level 100. So which one do you prefer, A or B?
Well, obviously B.
Yeah, but the gap between the poorest and the richest is bigger in society B, but the poorest people are better off in society B. They have 5 times more than society A, the poorest people, but there's a bigger gap. The problem is that the faster an economy grows, the faster the divide between rich and poor grows as well. But everybody is getting richer, the rich are getting richer faster. But people tend to look at the divide, but then don't tend to look at how better off the poor people are, even though the divide is more. Because people don't compare themselves to societies who are not growing as fast. People just compare themselves to people who are delivering it instead of looking how. But go on. Andrew, I say I'm talking too much. I saw Andrew and Jilly, your mic is open. Andrew, you wanted to say something?
I do. I do. Between the two polarities of socialism and capitalism, I just wonder how everybody feels about what we experience in Canada, which has been a period of what I'll call democratic socialism, where capitalism is very regulated. In one of the models that you proposed, regulated capitalism, I believe you called it, Armin. Is, in your view, is that very similar to democratic socialism, something that's practiced here in Canada to a degree I wish was a little bit more on the socialism side than the democratic side? But I take a look from my limited knowledge of Scandinavian countries. With respect to oil resources, it was Norway that imposed a very large, very high royalty on people who were drilling in the North Sea. And that royalty provided a lot of health care for people. It provided free education, I believe, up till university. I can't say I don't know what the homeless situation is like in a country like Norway. It's not the greatest in Canada. We have huge problems in that regard. Alberta, where our oil is, and who is currently being courted by MAGA, they're having a good in 2026 be very I think we'll have a separation referendum from Alberta, not from Quebec this time. I just wonder whether or not in Alberta what happened was that royalty was so low that it did. Canada is like a democratic dictatorship. All right. So I guess I've got
Okay.
some good
Yeah.
answers or some good replies coming. Thank you.
Okay, let's. Musad wanted to respond to this, so go ahead, Musad.
Yes, it's the two are in contradiction. And that's why socialist countries always have to lock their borders so people can't leave. Where it's the ultimate price to pay is you can't leave. I mean, you're stuck. Where in America, if you don't like the system, you can go to another country. America doesn't stop you, or Canada doesn't stop you. So the more socialist you are, you end up interfering with people's rights, and it becomes a nightmare. So
But I'm
I
not
think it's,
talking about that, Mossad. I'm talking about the concept of democratic socialism,
well, it's a
which is
contradiction.
a blend. It's
You
not a
can't.
contradiction. I've lived it. I've lived it, and it works.
Yeah, you can say that you've
You
lived it, but
can
maybe
have a blend.
you're living off the what has come before you. I mean, and to compare to Norway, which is incredibly rich, a small country, very tiny population, they have so much money. I spoke to no, I mean, we have a Norwegian that sometimes join us, but they own two properties as a normal thing. You know, Israelis barely have one, and we always live in tiny flats. I mean, it's a different world. So you can't compare, you know, every country, every culture. It's also a homogeneous society. When you have people who are have shared history, shared culture, it's easier to organize public projects. America, Canada is probably also very diverse, and therefore it's much harder to have public systems because you have different groups trying to pull the system towards them, and also all sorts of reasons. It's just you have to regulate everything. The more socialist you are, the slower you are. You add friction to your system. It's like taking, You're doing 100-meter run, but in order to make it fair, you take the fastest runners and you put weights on them so they don't run as fast. That's what you're doing.
Any form of socialism requires a government to take by force a wealth of people who have worked for it and give it to people who have not. Right? That's any type of socialism, because when every time a government promises you free thing, that's a lie. It's not free. People worked for it, and the government took it from them by force, and it's giving it to people and says, "Here's it's here." Well, how is it free? Somebody actually put in the work, and you took what they did with their work and you give it to the people who didn't work for it, right? So that is
So
not free.
you don't believe in redistribution of wealth through taxation?
I believe in a very limited amount of giving direct cash, not providing services from the demand side to people who have been so poor to the level that they cannot enter the market. Okay, fantastic. I believe that people who cannot afford food, healthcare, or shelter shouldn't be provided food, healthcare, or shelter. They should be provided money, because the government shouldn't enter from the supply side, because that destroys competition. You should just give them cash, or basically vouchers to spend on food, healthcare, but only for the people that are that poor that they cannot afford their very basic needs. That's what I
Is
think.
that similar?
Basically, yeah, that basically it's a negative tax, but only for these basic needs. But with regards to Canada, so you go ahead and answer that, because I wanted to answer your other questions as well.
Oh, I just wanted to
Okay.
say, and I think that just looking at the chat, Lydia May
Yeah.
actually has the same question that I asked. Are you talking about like a universal basic income?
Yeah, universal basic income is something that is probably going to become necessary with AI and automation. But even before that was necessary, I was like, I think we should have removed government-run education, healthcare, and housing, and just gave people who need these things just money. Okay, government shouldn't come and provide services and compete with the private sector. Because if you just give people money, then that money would just enter the private. You would just have a stronger private network, instead of destroying your own private sector by having the government competing with it, or completely destroying it. If people can't afford healthcare, just give people the money they need to spend on healthcare, and that way you will even have more money in the health. You will have more competition, because now there's more money chasing different goods and services. You wouldn't have a government competing with the private sector, and you would have lower costs, because the private sector competition would reduce the cost. You will have higher quality services because you have more competition, and you wouldn't have the government getting into businesses that it has no idea how to do, because the government is very inefficient. The government is very inefficient because it doesn't have any competitors. It doesn't have to reduce costs. In fact, it's in the best interest of the government to increase costs. When you're in the private sector, you need to provide better services to increase demand, but to increase your profit, you also need to reduce costs. But if the government is providing the same goods or services, it has no interest in reducing costs, because the bigger the cost, the more people will get hired. Like, you actually have to show that you're needed, so you have to actually show that you have a bigger cost. So that's why the government becomes very inefficient. The government needs to stay in what it's good at, which is laws, which is police, which is firefighters, which is the army, which is prisons, basically providing safety and security to the people. That's what the government needs to focus on. Everything else needs to be by the private sector, because the private sector keeps competing against the private sector, and that's how things get cheaper, and that's how quality you get increased quality and lower costs.
Well, thank you. I don't want a conversation. I know that people want to talk about other things, but with respect to UBI, if you guys Google universal basic income dauphin, like the French word dauphin, Manitoba, there was an experiment in 1968 where they instituted in a small rural community UBI, and the results were remarkable in terms of people going back to school, in terms of lower incarceration rates, in terms of lower welfare rates. And it's a model that I think you're absolutely right. I think it's going to have to happen in a significant way. Thank you.
No, but you bring up some interesting points. So please talk more when you get the chance, because I like the direction of the conversation went to. Sabra was on the list, and then
Yeah.
Jerry seems to be wanted to talk. So I'm going to add Jerry to the list, and then I
Do
see
you
Sabra.
hear me?
Yes, I hear you, Sabra. You
Amazing.
were talking.
I
Go
wanted to
ahead.
ask you, what do you think about companies lobbying, and if it's a okay thing and it's natural and it's supposed to be because it's like the vote of the company, or is it
Yep.
should be denied? Like they should not have power to lobby.
Well, but for two reasons, I'm in favor of lobbying. Right. First of all, it's free speech. How could you not allow a private company to talk to the government? Right.
Mhm.
Right. Second of all, it's actually fixes a lot of the flaws of democracy. Right. Because democracy is good, but a lot of voters are short-sighted, and industries think longer term. So it adjusts for the influence of the average population, who, like, one of the problems with democracy is when you tell people that I'm going to give you free this or free that, they think like, oh my god, I'm going to get a free shit, so I'm going to vote for the guy that's going to give me free shit. So it's really hard to convince people the costs associated with the government getting involved in the markets, right?
Yeah,
uh,
but like in the government,
they're going to
and
say
like
free stuff to who? To the voters?
yes, of course.
That's illegal.
No, but this is
That's
what
not that's
politicians
not
do,
that's not
Because,
lobbying. If you bribe people to vote a certain way for money, that's illegal.
but this is what you do when
Lobbying is like industries or different interest groups educating the government. It's not about bribing the voters to vote a certain way.
it's not promising the voters like different rights or different advantages for voting, because
That's illegal. If you say like, "Hey, vote for Trump," and I give you money, you go to jail for that.
or like you promise them things like not letting Uber come to your country or something like that.
So and
Because
so
we
on.
have,
This
I
will
can give you
happen.
example in Israel, if you allow me. We have all the taxi drivers in Israel voting for Bibi. It's kind of funny story because he promises them to not let Uber get in to the government.
But that's different. That's not like, did Uber come? Okay, so if BB
Like they
says vote for me,
preventing
and
the entry.
yeah, but
Mhm,
but see, that's different. If the politician says vote for
mhm,
me and I will do so and so regarding one company, that's allowed. But if the
mhm,
company comes and says vote for BB or vote for so and so and I will give you this,
mhm.
that's illegal. I
No, the
think, at
company
least.
cannot do this. It's only the
Yeah.
politicians can talk like that.
Yeah, but that's not lobbying. Lobbying is the industries, leaders of industries come to the government, or interest groups come to the government, and they educate them on certain things. Or
So how would you
or
call this
or
thing that I described? What would you call it? Like, what's the name of that?
I don't know the name for that. It's just regular politics.
So you don't think we should prevent this?
No, because it's free speech. How could you prevent it? Like, that's too much rules, too many rules. Like, you can't say this, you can't do that. Just let the
And
people
you're
be
not
free.
scared of companies overtaking the government from this? Like,
Governments are not united. Governments are against, like, you mean companies? Companies
yeah.
taking over the government? Companies are not united. Companies are fighting against each other. They have different interests. They're competing against each other. It's not like a united bloc.
But
Okay.
let's say, can I try to give you an American example maybe? In America, substituting education, they like giving, how do you call it? I don't know the name of that. They give a certain amount of money to the colleges for them to make cheaper
like
education.
grants.
Instead of that, they increase the amount that you need to pay for colleges because of that. They say, we have this amount of money, so we need to increase the cost of the education.
Wait, so in America, I don't understand what you're asking me. In America, who's doing the government is
The government
giving
gives money
grant,
to the colleges
right?
to
Okay.
substitute the
So what's the
When you mean
I
government,
don't know what the question is, but in my opinion, governments should stay out of education.
when he was referring to governments, did he refer to the federal government or the state government? Because there's like, as far as I know,
mm,
for colleges and universities in the United States, this is like the funding, like for grants and all that stuff, is done by the state. But the state
mhm.
has to keep universities and colleges that are like
Right.
eligible for that. they have to keep the federal government at bay, basically. Like make sure they're following the
All right, guys,
standards
we
and
need to
rules.
actually move
Yeah.
on. We need to move on to other people because
Yeah.
the list is actually really big. Samantha, do you want to manage the list? Do you want? Let me know.
I could try. What is the current list?
Okay, so I'm gonna put the current list in the chat. I saw Carol raise her hand as well. Guys, if you want to raise your hand, use the emoticon. Okay, I see David. David, you're already on the list. You're number 3. If you want to raise your hand, if you do your on the camera, we might not see it. So make sure you raise your hand like this so we actually get on the list. So I have Jilly, Jerry, David, Michael, and Carol. Oh, Michael. Oh, yes. And Tom.
I know, Tom.
Okay. Jilly.
Jerry.
Is it me?
All right, go ahead, Jilly. Yeah.
Okay, well, I think a lot of my points have sort of gone by, so I can just touch on them quickly because I just wrote some notes down as people were speaking. One of the things I think that people should understand when they're talking about the difference between low income and high income in Western capitalist countries is that you need to take into account the difference between what's called absolute poverty and relative poverty. So, absolute poverty is where people are actually starving. Relative poverty is where everybody has a TV set and a computer, but some people have really, they have wall screens and things like that. In Western societies, we're often complaining about relative poverty rather than absolute poverty. The other point I want to make about socialized or public health care is that it tends to lead towards, not always, not absolutely, but without sufficient safeguards, it tends to lead towards euthanasia policies and things like that. Because in the end, when government manages your healthcare, they also have to make economic decisions about it. And when they have to make economic decisions about it, then they have to start looking for things like how to cover their costs and things like that. And questions like euthanasia tend to come into it. I mean, in England, you've seen great examples of that where people weren't even allowed to go overseas to get alternative healthcare that could have saved the lives of their babies, for example, simply because the government deemed it to be illegal. And one of the motives for that is that once the government controls your healthcare and there isn't sufficient competition in the game, they have to start dictating, just for economic reasons, what you can and can't have. And another issue that came up when I was listening to you was the inefficient use of resources in communism, socialist systems. They are not very efficient at using resources because it's actually in the interests of private industry to conserve resources, which is done between a cost benefit ratio that companies work out, where they work out how much they can sell something for, as opposed to how long they can stay in the market with something. Contrary to what people believe, communist systems tend to use resources quite heavily. That was one of the things. And the issue that you brought up, I mean, about the redistribution of wealth actually often leads to demotivation in a population because you don't get any more for working harder. So if you don't get any more for working harder, you don't have to work that hard because, and I've seen this in practice. I found myself working in a situation where union rules were so extensive that for half the day we were taken away and locked up in a shed because we were overproducing. And that was an issue. And the other thing about government overreach into things that can be done privately has to do with an effect called crowding out, where the government's so involved in certain aspects of industry that private industry don't get a look in. Look, there's so much that I could say, and so much that went by in the conversations, and you can go so much deeper into all of these issues. And the irony is that if you have a look at Marx, one of the beautiful things about Marx, and I am not a Marxist per se, but one of the beautiful things about Marx was how beautifully he analyzed capitalism. But in terms of an actual system, socialism as an alternative or communism as an alternative, is much less effective. No one's saying that capitalism is perfect, but communism is much less effective at redistributing the available resources through a society. And look, that's it. By the time I got to talk, all these little issues had come up, and then I thought, oh, I want to throw them into the conversation so people can think about them.